Yo, Ryan Hart here. Welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast channel. These are the interview sessions where I put my curious questions to inspiring people with one goal in mind, to help you be better than you were yesterday in your heart and in your mind. While you're here spending time with us, I'd love it if you subscribed, leave a like, or maybe drop a comment below with letting us know some of your thoughts on the interview. Please do share it with someone that you'd love to help be better too. Michael, welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here, Ryan.
It's amazing. We were just having a little chat off air. We were talking about this wonderful piece of art that you've pulled together, the Hype Handbook. And before we dive into that, I'd love to have you bring to life part of that book, which is about 34 years old, 3 weeks into, your wife's pregnant, and you have this vision. What was that vision?
Yeah, I don't know if it was a vision or a nightmare. I had always been a pretty creative kid in the traditional sense, meaning that I didn't want to go into business. I mean, I wanted to write novels or make music, and I had done those kind of things. And at the time that my baby, who's now 10 years old, was on the way, I was a vice president at a company that I had just fallen into, a very corporate company. I came to it because I needed a job and they were doing something kind of creative. That piece folded. They had us doing this very brass tacks work that I never thought I would do. I'm a hard worker, so I did well. And then I'm in this job and my title was Vice President of Solution Development. And I was working like a dog and I had no idea what that title meant. I still don't. And so I just had this vision of my daughter being older and taking me to whatever they call it, career day, or take your parents to school day or whatever. Excuse me. And saying I'm a vice president of solution development at a business process outsourcing company. And I wanted to be a novelist. At one point, I thought it'd be cool to start a record label. And I'm like, I'm in my 30s and I was just in my 20s and I was just in my teens. I'm going to be dead soon. And I'm going to be a vice president of solution development. I'm doing nothing that I was put on this earth to do. And that was the beginning of a new path for me because it scared the living heck out of me.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you've just talked about having an appetite for hard work and a hard work ethic, yet you chose to piss off someone that was hustle was the primary focus of their brand. Tell us about that story.
Well, I believe in hard work. I mean, I don't think anyone is ever become successful just waiting for things to come to them. However, I don't know. How do you think people in your audience are pretty familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk? Because in some worlds he's extremely famous, and in other worlds he's maybe not.
So I would openly admit to have been influenced by Gary. Absolutely buy into some of his principles. I disagree with the one that you disagree, which is about hustle. The word makes me slightly shiver, and I'd love to know why you decided to write the article that you wrote.
So I had left that job that I just talked about, and my idea was that I was going to be as I thought about it at the time, a copywriter. Really, it was what they call a demand generation writer. I saw an opportunity in writing things like white papers, which was a big lead generation tool at the time, and which I knew how to do, and web copy, case studies, whatever. And I just figured, because I wrote well, and I always have been given a lot of praise for that throughout my life, I figured, people would like the writing and it couldn't be too hard to write business stuff, right? And people would pay me for it and I would do well. And I didn't. I mean, there was a year where I burned through all my savings. I got some work, and I got some referrals, but not enough. And I wasn't known for anything. I was just kind of this guy who took gigs. And I really tried to figure out how to market myself, and I was working really hard, but I just, really struggled to do that. So this is another story. I decided I was going to be a little more mischievous in my marketing and tell it how it was. And one of the first things I did was, I saw Gary Vaynerchuk, who was the preeminent guru, and maybe still is, but of I guess what you would call internet marketing, digital marketing, social media marketing, whatever. And he just spent all this time screaming from the stage about how all his young followers needed to hustle. Like he would say, you got to work so hard at promoting yourself that you should sit on the toilet and not stop tweeting while you're sitting on the toilet. And I was kind of like, well, I don't know. I mean, like, what if you're the one making the wine instead of selling the wine? Because his first business was a wine sales company. And I also thought, why aren't his followers as rich as him? It sounds like the more he gives this advice, the richer he gets. And his fans love him more and more. So there's obviously a reason he's giving this advice. And I'm not sure it's to make the lives of his acolytes any better. So I called him out on this, and he got very, very agitated. I mean, I was a nobody at the time, and he responded to me directly and really took issue. And, you know, God bless him. I think he's a great business person, but he wasn't very coherent in his argument, which means I hit a nerve, you know. But it was the beginning of my career. I mean, picking that fight with him really brought me a lot of attention because a lot of people felt the same way I did. So I guess we could talk about that, but to answer your initial question, I guess I've always been interested in why people do what they do. So if there's a prominent guru out there and he's spending easily 50% or more of his time berating his followers about not working hard enough, most of whom do, or else they wouldn't be into Gary Vaynerchuk. Why is he doing that? Is it really because he's concerned that people aren't working hard enough? I don't buy that, because the people that you know, read self-help stuff and read personal development stuff work hard, but there's so much more to it. So then why is he doing it? It turns out cult leaders do the same thing. If you look at the Moonies, Moonies work 70 hours a week for free, you know, selling the cult. But also there was a guy named Gurdjieff who was a cult leader who used to have movie stars who were fans of his dig holes on his property to nowhere. It turns out that when you work really hard on behalf of a cause or a leader or a movement, it breaks down your capacity for critical thought because you don't have time and you get tired. And two, it eliminates cognitive dissonance. So if you begin to doubt the ideas of the leader, there's a big sunk cost, because if you've worked like a dog on behalf of these ideas, you can either say, I just wasted 3 years of my life, or you can say, these ideas are even better than I thought they were. So unwittingly or wittingly, Gary Vaynerchuk doing that helps build his following. There's a more benefit to him than his followers. So I would say follow what he does. Don't follow his advice if you want to addict people to you.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So you've taken that learning and reflection around how you've one of the strategies you've had, and you've reflected on a number of other strategies, and you've documented 12 of them within your book. And you know, it says here, from the world's greatest propagandists, the self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers. And the thing that really triggered me in the introduction was that it said that there are many good people out there that try and do good things, make a difference, and yet them and their ideas can sometimes get left behind. And all too often, these ideas and these strategies can be used for harm and not for good. And I'd love to know how good people can make use of these. You say that they are psychological realities. Where does one start? Where does the naive leader, where does the heart-centered leader start?
Okay, so we were talking before the podcast about this idea of heart-centered people, leaders, of which you consider yourself one, and you think, or you say that your listeners are. I would say I'm the same way to a fault. In other words, there are people who come to what I call hype naturally. And just to tell you, hype, even though it has a negative connotation, I define it differently. It's basically any activity that gets people emotional, highly emotional, and in a way that allows you to guide them to take whatever action you want them to take, right? So there are people who are very natural at that. I would say it's very clear to me that Gary Vaynerchuk is natural at that. I mean, he was selling baseball cards and making tons of money when he was a kid. He's a hustler, you know? Donald Trump is very natural at that. Whatever else he's good at, he's very natural, or bad at, he's very natural at that. I'm not. You know what I mean? I mean, I was scribbling stories and writing songs when I was a kid. I was selling nothing. In fact, I was terrible at selling. I'm a softie. And now I think of that as a good thing because I think our weaknesses and our strengths are the same.
Yeah.
But I don't love confrontation. I've not had difficult conversations when I should far too long. I tend to be the guy who keeps someone employed longer than I should to my own detriment. I've had the same friends since I was 7 years old. So I'm not very natural at this. However, I've had people in my life who were. And so what I became interested in is, if these people are so good at selling themselves, is it that these tactics and strategies are evil and nefarious? Because if they are, then you know what? I'm not going to play that game. I'll be who I am. Or is it that they, for some reason, tend on balance to have a better understanding of how human beings react to things? And if so, can they be used ethically? And what convinced me that they can be used ethically is there's a class of people, usually artists, who use what I call hype to add color to the world. They don't do it to take advantage of people. I mean, you look at David Bowie or Andy Warhol or the punk movement, or even P.T. Barnum to a certain extent. People gained pleasure from the psychological sort of, color that they added to things, to the transcendence they created. So I tend to take those people more as models than the flat out con artists.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because your first strategy is make war, not love. And I sit here, my logo, my emblem my symbol is the blue love heart. Yeah. Talk to us about that. Why should we make war, not love?
Well, so I picked a fight with a person, and that was pretty foolhardy of me. It happened to work in my favor. I'm not saying that you have to do that. You can pick a fight with an idea, right? So let me give you a little bit of background. So there was a social scientist, or not a social scientist, I'm sorry, an archaeologist, just a scientist of sorts, who found an alcove in South Africa, on the coast of South Africa, that for various reasons, which we don't have that much time to discuss, we're almost certain now that that's where all people are descended from. The people who ended up at this alcove, you, me, the person who serves you lunch, we're all related to this group of people. It's a very small group of people because there was a climate change event, and almost all of Homo sapiens died out. And the people who survived moved from the savannah to this area, and they found a dense bed of shellfish in this area. And the thing about shellfish is you don't have to hunt shellfish. It's sitting there for the taking. It's very high calorie. It's nutritious. So these people just had this like oasis of food in a wet area, so it was great. Now, the only thing keeping them from getting this food was other people. So all of these people were genetically the same, but they perceived themselves to be different because of whatever tribal affiliation they had. So those human beings who were able to cooperate very, very well with people they perceived to be like them, and simultaneously have a lot of antagonism toward people that they perceive to be not like them, monopolized the shellfish and survived while the other people starved. And we're all descended from those people, even people with hearts on their, literally on their sleeves or on their shirts. So what I'm saying is that we are more attracted to lines in the sand and bold statements and being against than we are attracted to being for. That doesn't mean we don't love. People who love their tribe survived also. So does that mean you have to go around picking fights with people? No, you can pick a fight with an idea. Your fight could be, I don't know.
Leaders.
Yeah. Climbing to the top, dog eat dog, climbing to the top is destroying business in the internet era. That could be the fight you pick. And then a tribe forms around that idea. So love could be your fight. But just being like, hey, this is why I'm great, and this is why you should listen to me, no one cares about that.
I mean, I try not to be controversial. And then I read your bit where you talked about the moment before you you hovered your thumb over the, or finger over the button to
Yeah,
go
it's true.
publish it. And I have the same. Sometimes there are things going on in the coaching industry. I'm like, oh, that's bullshit. And then I uncharacteristically write a post, and they often usually are the most popular because what it does is it gives a voice to everyone who's sat there thinking
That's
the
what it
same.
is.
It's just so uncomfortable to do that, right?
But it works. I mean, it just does, because if you're not, it's, you know, it's not just the way we're wired. It's also because it gives a tribe, like you said, to the people who don't have, they feel they're alone in the world, and then they hear you saying what you say and they form around you. But also, I would posit that these fights need to be picked. If a bunch of people are out there giving harmful, not harmful, but misguided material in the name of making profit for themselves or whatever, why shouldn't you call that out? You don't have to be disrespectful. You don't have to insult their looks. You don't have to insult their children, but can you call out their ideas? I don't know. Why not? Why is that a bad thing?
I really liked the visual imagery that you gave around aligning yourself to mini Oprahs. What do you mean by that?
So I use the example of Oprah because we all know that Oprah is this person who, if you, back when she had a show, and now she has a channel and all that, but back when she had a show, if you got your book, for example, on her show, or if you were a psychologist or doctor who got on her show, you were suddenly catapulted beyond any of your competition. So like Dr. Oz was a really successful doctor, good doctor at the time. Now he isn't, because he sells cures that have been proven to be completely profit driven and that don't work and that he knows doesn't work. However, you know, he became Oprah's favorite health expert. He was good in his field, but no one knew who he was. And he's a celebrity because he wrote on Oprah. Now, the reason I brought that up is because the rest of us think that the way to build a following is to build it person by person. That's why everyone talks about viral marketing, right? It's this idea that you need to come up with this thing that people find on the internet, content or whatever, or build this giant network person by person, or build an Instagram following person by person. A lot of times the reason we think that is because we're buying into the myths that the really successful people put out there, because it's a lot more romantic to think that you're building this big following grassroots. Now, there's always part of that, but what's more effective is find the figures in your niche that are the Oprahs of your niche. Unfortunately, we're in the internet era where you don't have to align with Oprah. That's just as foolhardy, you know? I mean, you don't want to try. People are like, I have a book, I'm going to get on Oprah. Well, good luck, you know? But let's say you're in the, I don't know, organic beef jerky, farming industry. I don't know. There's got to be someone in that industry who has all the followers in that industry. And that person is a lot easier to bond with and form a relationship with than Oprah. And if you can do that, and there are ways to nurture that relationship and get them to want to help you, you will catapult over everyone else in the space.
I've often described that concept as like Minesweeper. Do you remember that game that was on
the
PC? It's like that. So every now and again you choose a square and it opens up a few around you, but every now and again you get this one that just opens up a huge
It's exactly that. Yeah, it's exactly that. Wasn't that a satisfying feeling? There's a whole generation that'll never know that feeling.
Absolutely.
On Minesweeper. Yeah.
So good. I really like the story that you gave of Ryan Holiday. I didn't realize so much about his background and how he was a trickster. And why do you put a bit of a caveat, become a trickster, but only for a limited amount of time?
Yeah, and I think Ryan Holiday is the perfect example of this. So there's a character in every mythology called the trickster, almost every mythology. And it's a character who, a god, usually a lesser god, Loki is the example we all know because of the Avengers movies. But it's a god who is amoral. They're neither immoral nor moral. And they play tricks. They upend the order of things. And in doing so, they usually are also the god of art. They usually create art. They usually are the most creative god. Because the thing is, when we're already in a position of power, which the trickster gods usually don't have power, it's easy to follow the rules.
Mm.
It's easy to, I have a friend who's a really good electrocardiogram doctor, really top notch. And I wouldn't say he started off with power, but he went to a good school and he knew exactly what to do. He had to be the best in his field at all stages, but he was valedictorian of his high school, top student in college, did the pre-med classes, moved on to chief residency, But if you're trying to do something new, and if you're coming from a disempowered background, you don't know what the steps are, and it's difficult, right? So you sometimes need to play the role of that trickster god. You need to drum up attention in ways that you have to ask forgiveness for, not permission. You have to do things under the surface. You got to get people angry. You got to make people laugh, all of this. And that gets you attention. The reason I say that it's temporary for most people is that you don't want to be the perpetual clown. Like Dennis Rodman was a really good basketball player, but other than basketball players, no one knew who he was. And then he dated Madonna, and Madonna taught him that he needed to be, this is what people think, flamboyant. And when he was on the Bulls, he dyed his hair. He wore Pearl Jam t-shirts, which in the NBA was a big deal for whatever reason. In the 90s, he pierced his nose and dressed in a dress, and he became a bona fide star, even for non-basketball fans. But it's now 30 years later, and he's still playing that role, and he's a clown. The only person who will give him an audience is Kim Jong-un, which is a disgrace, and he's just playing this same tired role. He forgot who he really is. What Ryan Holiday did that was so good is he it's funny. It's very ironic with him, because if you think of him, he's a young guy, but you think of him as like an elder. He rarely cracks jokes. He's very serious. He holds people to this high stoic standard, He started out though as like the director of marketing for American Apparel, and their marketing was, they were a brand new clothing company in a very crowded environment. So he would do things like he would hire a porn star, Sasha Grey, for very cheap amount of money, and have her pose naked with like bars in front of whatever, in socks for a clothing company, and get everyone to talk about it. He would spray paint his own billboards and then like anonymously tip it off to the press. He was smart enough to realize, though, that once he built a name for himself and accumulated assets and accumulated capital, he always knew he wanted to be a writer of serious books. So now he had the name and the market and the money, and he could pivot. So he wrote a book debunking his own approaches and wiping the slate clean while benefiting from them at the same time. So you got to know when to pivot depending on when your goals are. I don't want to use the word pivot. That's a horrible word, but you know what I mean.
I get
Shift
it. I get
to
it.
the new role.
Yeah. I'm conscious of your time, and I've got one curious question. Why do you think the movement of the early church was so successful? You talk about St. Paul in your book. Why do you think that particular movement was so successful?
I think there are a lot of reasons. Full books have been written on why Christianity succeeded when like Mithraism, which was another religion of the time that was very popular, failed. But from the perspective of hype and of promotion of a certain faith, and also I don't want to minimize, if you are a Christian, maybe it's because it's the true faith. I don't want to minimize that.
Oh, I'm good. I'm learning. I'm open to your opinions.
Yeah. I'm not a Christian, but I'm saying what do I know, right? But what I do know is there were a lot of human beings who were also, at least in part, very responsible for its spread. And it wasn't Jesus, and it was not the early apostles, because they very much thought of themselves as Jewish, who just happened to believe in some different things. So they ate kosher, they circumcised their sons, as Jewish people are wont to do, which at the time was not very appealing to mainstream Romans. They didn't shave, they weren't permitted to shave, which Romans tended to do. So it was small. People think of St. Paul as having come to Christianity when it was already this religion. There were like 200 Christians at the time that St. Paul joined. And what St. Paul realized was that he had never met Jesus, and he realized the world needed to understand this gospel and embrace this gospel, but they definitely weren't going to embrace it as just an offshoot of Judaism. So he made it very Roman. So he was from Tarsus, and in Tarsus there's another religion. I think it is Mithraism, where you stand under a statue of a bull, and they sacrifice a bull, and blood comes down, and and by through the blood you are redeemed. There are all these different ceremonies that he basically took wholesale and incorporated into Christianity to make it palatable for Romans. He got rid of the kosher eating, he got rid of circumcision. I mean, he got rid of all of this. So the idea here is that people are very reluctant on a neurological level to embrace rapid change, or change that is too close to change that is too broadly sort of afar from what they're used to. And if you try to thrust new ideas on people like that, especially all at once, their cortisol will kick in and they'll reject it. But if you can wrap your ideas, especially your new ideas, in familiar clothing and introduce them slowly, you can get even the most radical ideas to be accepted.
You talked there around cortisol, and one of your chapters is about managing your internal state, which is important to manage that. So what are some of the internal states that we need to be mindful of and to create?
Well, I'm surprised this chapter didn't alleviate the triggering that I gave you in the early chapter, because I know I got you upset in the first chapter, but maybe this chapter, alleviated some of that, because, I did some research on why so many bad people are good at mass psychology, are good at building huge followings and driving lots of emotion around themselves, because I think we can all agree that a lot of the people who create these massive followings, people frothing in the mouth to do whatever they say, there are good people who do it, but I think we can all agree that the most prominent examples are some of the most nefarious characters in history. So is that because these strategies and tactics in themselves are evil? Because if they are, I want nothing to do with them. I mean, I don't want to cheat people and harm people, right? It turns out, though, that people with what's a category of personality disorders called antisocial personality disorder, extreme narcissism, malignant narcissism, psychopathy, sociopathy, when they have done research, like they'll put these people into artificially induced stressful situations, and compared to the population at large, their pulse won't go up. So what that basically means is that they're very detached because of the lack of empathy or whatever. They can kind of view things as a chessboard. They can kind of like look at people and say, okay, what do I need to do without emotion getting in the way to get the result I want? So that can have some really negative consequences, but it's also effective. So if I like to say that I wrote this book on hype. If I could myself follow every single law in here to the T, I would be richer than Warren Buffett. But my emotions get in the way, right? So the idea is, how do you keep enough emotion to be an ethical person, but not let unrealistic emotions get in the way? Like, so you say, I'm triggered, I don't want to pick a fight, even though I'm not hurting anyone, because it's not who I am, and your heartbeat starts going, and so you just don't do it. Well, what if instead you worked on yourself? I don't mean you, but anybody. You worked on, whether it's meditation or martial arts or eating the right way, and you calmed your internal state, so you could say, okay, my heartbeat isn't going fast. Let me look at this rationally. Is this fight that I'm picking really going to hurt anyone? Or is it just that my heart was racing and I interpreted it negatively? And then you can make more informed decisions without unrealistic emotions getting in the way. It could be therapy, whatever. But when you're reacting emotionally, and when you're in a reactive state instead of a proactive state, it's really tough to become a good marketer of any kind, let alone a good hype artist, as I call it.
What does the phrase "always better than yesterday" mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another version of an internal version of what I call give the babies their milk before you give them their meat. This idea of, if you want to convince someone of something, and I talk about this in the book, don't try to introduce it all at once, introduce it in stages. And before they know it, they'll be on your page. And I think you can do that with yourself. I mean, if you're like, you know what, I'm 30 years old, and I'm not a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, so I suck and there's no way I can get there. Well, that's a tough place to be in, but we behave that way all the time. We don't start diets because we're not already 30 pounds lighter. So if you can instead be thinking, how can I make the smallest executable step toward wherever I want to get every single day? And even if some days you take a step backwards, if you do that most days, before you know it, you'll be a completely different person.
On the topic of young billionaires, what is it about Jack Dorsey that annoys you so much?
Oh, you saw that tweet? I don't know. He obviously started a great company, whatever. I'm a real jerk, aren't I? I don't know why I say these things publicly, but I guess I need to, he just strikes me as this guy who, in his own mind, and I'd like to see what you think about this, but in his own mind and in his public persona, he's like Mr. Enlightened. He's got the long beard now, which he didn't used to have. We both have beards, but it's like obviously this cultivated, like wise man thing. He meditates for 6 months straight. He's like, but meanwhile, he's
trying to compete with Jim Carrey.
Yeah, but meanwhile, he's testifying in front of Congress, and it's very clear that his motive is personal, gain. I mean, he a lot of stuff that was very harmful to democracy was done on his platform, and this enlightened being did nothing about it until the tension got so high that it was bad for his PR. So I guess there's so many people who are out there trying to look like the good guy, and they're very holier than thou, and it's very surface level. But when you really dig into the stuff, it's like the person who wants to save Africa, but they don't talk to their own children, and their children grow up without a father. I don't know. I have a pet peeve, and he like typifies that guy to me. I mean, what's your thought? I mean, am I wrong? Am I off base?
Well, the way you've just described it, absolutely love that. And I think there's a huge awakening, or there needs to be one, particularly in the influencer world, where if there's a gap between what you say, what you genuinely think, and what you believe doesn't mirror what you say and what you do, I hope for a culture where we call that out. And I hope that those companies or brand reputations, they start to crumble because they get too many people that imitate and mimic and look up to that stuff.
Right, exactly.
Secondly, there's a reason I don't use Twitter, and if it reflects,
and I shared that on Twitter, so sorry. So I'm not exactly Mr.
No, all good. But I think Twitter is a space for lack of accountability and what do I want to say? Bullying veiled in free speech.
100%. I agree. And I should. It's funny. I went off of Facebook for about 4 months, both because of the ethical piece and also just because it was making me less happy. And I was happier. I really loved being off there. And then my book came out, and I'm pretty good at social media marketing. So I went back on, and it has helped my book sales, but I hate it's, I wish I weren't on it. I noticed that my contentment level and my has gone down, and my distractibility has gone up. So that's where I struggle. I do use it very effectively to market myself, but at the same time, it's not a positive impact on my life.
And it's those that don't have that conscious awareness, that don't understand, that go back to it and aren't that aware. So I just want to say thank you for your time. I'm conscious, A, we've not scratched the surface of this book, and B, the surface of the organization that you are the CEO of. So I'd just love for you to let us know, how can people connect with you, understand more about what you're doing in the world, and where they can get your book.
Well, thanks. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to plug myself. I appreciate it. To order the book, I mean, obviously, speaking of big, evil multinational corporations, the easiest way to order it is obviously Amazon. But, if you can get your bookstore to carry it and order it there, some are carrying it, but things have been weird, with COVID. It's available certainly, at the very least, on all the online platforms and in many of the offline ones. The company is called MicroFame Media, and it's microfamemedia.com. My website is Michael F. Schein, spelled Schein.com. The way that I love to keep in touch with people is a thing I do called the Hype Book Club. So I'm always reading these very weird books, many of them very entertaining, but I've read all the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People type books. I've read them all. Many of them are good. But where I've really gotten the most value is from these very strange crowd psychology books and biographies of some of these obscure characters and hype artists. And so when I find good ones, I recommend them. And it's become more than just recommendations. I trade emails with a lot of fans. It's become a book club. So yeah, that's hypereads.com. Yeah, if you sign up to that, that's a great way to keep in touch with me and keep in touch with sort of this discourse that we're having.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Just be honored if you could leave us with a final thought from your good self.
Yeah, I just hope that you approach this conversation with an open mind. Anyone listening, I'm well aware that well-meaning people, our self-perception of ourselves doesn't include being known as something like a hype artist. And that's why I took back the term. It's kind of like the word punk used to be a negative thing. And some people have done some great work under the name punk. Even the word queer, the LGBTQ community has taken that word, which used to mean weirdo, in a very derogatory sense and made it a positive thing. So if we could build an army of people who are actually savvy about building emotion and attention around really beneficial ideas that bring people together instead of dividing them on a deep sense, you know what I mean? Not about picking fights with bad ideas, like what you're doing, pro-love messages, pro-creativity messages. I think it would be a really good antidote to some of the kind of nasty characters who are so good at this, who have steered us in the wrong direction over the last couple of years in particular. So yeah, I hope you'll approach these ideas with an open mind.
Love that. Michael, thank you so much for your time, my friend.
Thank you, Ryan. This was an absolute blast.